Three identical cries tore through the suffocating darkness of a Virginia plantation house in April 1802. 3 infants were born to Margaret Fairmont that night, but only 2 were ever acknowledged. The third child, darker-skinned by a fraction of shade, described only as the ghost of a summer sun from all family records within hours of birth. What truly unfolded in that delivery room has been intentionally buried for 2 centuries, hidden in dusty court records and the terrifying testimonies of enslaved women. Local authorities ignored it. The family's name was deliberately scrubbed from history. Tonight, the forgotten liturgy pieces together the agonizing secret of the Fairmont plantation and the decision Margaret Fairmont made. A choice so monstrous it would ultimately destroy everyone involved. To continue unraveling these dark chapters of American history, hidden in forbidden family archives, hit that subscribe button right now, and let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. Now, let's return to Henry County, Virginia, 1802, where a fortune was carved out of 800 acres of prime river bottomland, built by the sweat and lives of 43 enslaved people. The main house stood as a testament to this generational wealth, a grand brick structure announcing prosperity to all who passed. Margaret Fairmont, just 17 when she arrived 6 years earlier, was the embodiment of Southern nobility, married off to Thomas Fairmont, her senior by 15 years. Their union was publicly celebrated as the perfect match. Old land meeting respectable beauty. But by 1802, the perfectly constructed image of their marriage was fractured. 2 miscarriages had deepened a silence between them, pushing Margaret into a melancholic isolation while Thomas retreated to the fields and the burgeoning business of Richmond. The crushing pressure for an heir, fueled by her mother's relentless letters, became an acute physical burden on Margaret. When she finally conceived in the summer of 1801, the entire estate held its breath. Thomas returned to her side, and the house slaves prepared the nursery with an unusual care, sensing the weight of this impending birth. But no one, save Margaret herself, anticipated she carried not 1 child, but 3. The doctor confirmed the possibility of triplets late in the pregnancy, sending Margaret into a state that violently swung between elation and sheer terror. Thomas calculated the advantage of multiple heirs. Blind to the agonizing secret Margaret held, she knew what he must never discover. Among the house workers was Esther, a woman born on the property who moved with the near-invisible efficiency expected of her station. Margaret developed an intense, peculiar reliance on Esther, insisting she sleep adjacent to the master bedroom, claiming a need for nighttime assistance. Thomas saw it as a pregnant woman's indulgence. What he failed to see was the truth of his absence the previous summer. While Thomas was settling an estate in Williamsburg for 3 weeks, Margaret was left alone in the stifling quiet of the plantation. Out in the fields, working as a skilled carpenter, was a man named William. He had been acquired 3 years prior, noticeably lighter-skinned than others, the result of a white overseer's parentage, a fact noted in his sale documents but never spoken aloud. The forbidden entanglement between Margaret and William that summer was never written down, never testified to. Yet 9 months later, as the dinner plates were being cleared and Margaret's water broke just after sunset, on the night of April 23rd, 1802, she faced the terrifying certainty her children might reveal a truth that would shatter her world and unleash ruin on the entire Fairmont legacy. Thomas, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding, immediately sent for the doctor. With a doctor miles away, Margaret's room became a crucible of fear, attended only by Esther and the experienced Ruth. Downstairs, Thomas performed the expected ritual of pacing and drinking, oblivious to the monstrous inheritance unfolding above him. Margaret, seized by near hysteria, grasped Esther's hand, whispering desperate pleas. "You have to help me. Whatever happens, you have to help me. Promise me." Esther, her expression unreadable, gave the single, hardening nod that sealed their fate in a conspiracy of silence. Just before midnight, the first healthy boy was born, bringing Thomas upstairs for a brief moment of genuine, proud satisfaction. An hour later, the second son followed, slightly smaller, but equally vigorous. Thomas's bewilderment at his sudden fortune was interrupted by the late arrival of Dr. Jans, who warned there may be a third. The third child arrived at 2:17 a.m. The room plunged into a profound silence that had nothing to do with the completion of labor. The infant was noticeably darker than his brothers, not dramatically so, but undeniably different. He carried a golden-brown hue, the unmistakable, terrifying flesh and blood evidence of Margaret's summer betrayal. Margaret saw him and her worst fear broke the surface in a tortured whimper. Dr. Yancey frowned, but before he could speak, Esther moved with sudden, surgical authority. Miss Margaret needs rest. Too much blood lost, she commanded, sending the doctor to mix tonic and Ruth to fetch linens. In that brief, charged moment, Margaret and Esther exchanged an unspeakable understanding. This was the transaction. The third child is weak, Esther announced clearly, muffling the lusty cry of the infant against her body. In the exhaustion and dim candlelight, the lie was easily accepted. Common with triplets, Dr. Yancey muttered, relieved to have an explanation. Thomas was spared the sight of his third son. Instead, Dr. Yancey delivered the sanitized news. 2 heirs were healthy, but a third had arrived too weak to survive the night. Thomas accepted the fate philosophically. 2 sons presented a cleaner legacy anyway. By 3 a.m., the house was settled. Thomas was drunk and asleep. Only Esther remained in the bedroom, the perfectly healthy infant sleeping soundly in her arms. "Hide him," Margaret whispered, her eyes burning with feverish desperation. "He can't stay here. No one can know. You promised." "I promise," Esther replied quietly, the weight of the child heavy in her arms. What Esther did next became the beginning of the forgotten liturgy for Henry County. She moved through the darkness of the plantation, the infant concealed beneath her shawl. Her original destination, her own cabin, was compromised by a burning lamp. Instead, she slipped into the cold, damp stone of the old dairy house, a forgotten corner of the estate. Standing in the shadows, breathing the smell of old milk and damp stone, she faced the true, monstrous choice Margaret had forced upon her. She could smother the Shala quiet death easily, explained by Dr. Yancey's prediction. One more small body, buried and forgotten. The secret would die, but Esther looked down at the child's small, innocent chest. She thought of her own 2 infants, lost to the brutal indifference of this place. She realized Margaret's decision was not about health or strength, but about erasing a painful shade of skin, the proof of a betrayal Margaret herself had engineered. Esther chose a path that was neither simple mercy nor easy compliance. Instead, she chose an act of vengeance disguised as salvation. She turned her back on the old dairy and walked deeper into the plantation grounds, towards the row of cramped cabins where a woman lived alone. Esther made her desperate journey to the far edge of the quarters, to the cabin of Denina. At 53, Denina was an anomaly, a survivor who had outlived 2 husbands and 4 children, her hands gnarled by years in the tobacco fields. She was ancient by plantation standards, now occupying the strange limbo of the half-retired. Denina opened the door as if expecting the worst. "You have something that needs hiding," she stated, her eyes moving to the bundle of Miss Margaret's third child, born different, darker. "Shows his father's blood." Denina opened her door wider, demanding the truth. Why not just do what she wants? Make him disappear proper. Esther's jaw tightened. "Because I won't kill a child for his mother's sin." This declaration of moral defiance was enough. Denina, with a quiet strength born of survival, took the bundle. Margaret had offered no name, only erasure, so Esther gave him one. "Call him Samuel." Denina agreed, but warned. "This is going to end bad. Secrets like this always end bad." Esther agreed but countered. "Maybe, but not tonight." Esther returned to the main house as dawn broke, where Margaret lay consumed by feverish relief. "It's done," Esther confirmed. "He won't be found. No one will know." Margaret thanked her, convinced she had been saved, but Esther knew the terrible truth. She had not saved Margaret. She had simply relocated the problem, turning the secret into a ticking mechanism that would eventually detonate. Downstairs, Thomas accepted the news that his third son had died during the night, and a small, unmarked coffin holding nothing but weighted stones was buried with a quiet ceremony. Only Esther and Denina knew that the Fairmont legacy was founded on a lie and an empty grave. Life at Fairmont Plantation settled into a sinister normalcy. The acknowledged twins, Thomas Jr. and Henry, thrived. their pale faces captured in a portrait that hung in the main parlor, a constant, visible declaration of their legitimacy. Meanwhile, in a small cabin, Samuel spent his first 2 years in precarious invisibility. Danina protected him fiercely, explaining his presence with a plausible story. A grandson sent back after his mother, her sole daughter, died in childbirth. Thomas never questioned it. As long as the work was done, the internal life of the quarters was irrelevant to him. Esther visited frequently, maintaining the lifeline, watching Samuel grow. She saw the telltale signs, the golden hue of his skin darkening, the subtle, unmistakable features he shared with the twins. Her relationship with Margaret was now a cold, shared conspiracy, their mutual vulnerability creating a painful distance. But the secret was never truly safe. Among the enslaved community, knowledge of Samuel's parentage spread through the forgotten liturgy, whispered conversations, and careful observation. They saw the resemblance, the unusual protection, the better rations, and knew that Samuel was a living testament to Margaret's betrayal. Most protected the secret, understanding the horrific consequences of exposure. However, a man named Jacob, an ambitious enslaved field overseer, saw an opportunity. Jacob wanted to be indispensable. He wanted favor, perhaps even freedom. He began calculated surveillance, noting the protection, observing the child's resemblance to the Fairmont boys, and doing the arithmetic of dates and births. He waited patiently for the exact right moment to use this explosive knowledge. That moment arrived in the spring of 1804, when Samuel was 2 years old, and the resemblance to the twins was becoming undeniable. Jacob approached Master Thomas in the newly planted tobacco fields, mildly interrupting his inspection. "Master Fairmont, sir, might I have a word? Something you should know about, sir, concerning the family." "What is it, Jacob? Make it quick." Thomas's casual annoyance vanished as Jacob hinted at a delicate matter concerning Miss Margaret and the children. The enslaved overseer performed a calculated reluctance before finally dropping the bomb. There was a child in the quarters, Danina's supposed grandson, but that was a lie. Sir, you take a look at the child yourself. Compare him to your own sons. See what you see. Thomas was not stupid. He instantly connected the dots: Margaret's pregnancy, the vanishing third child, the quick sale of William. His voice dangerously quiet. He ordered Jacob, "Take me to this child." At Danina's cabin, Thomas stopped 10 feet away. Playing beside the old woman was Samuel, who looked up and met Thomas's gaze with eyes that were undeniably his own. The resemblance was not subtle. Thomas saw his sons, his father. He saw himself in the face of the small child. Danina maintained the cover story, but Thomas exposed the lie, detailing exactly when he had sold her daughter years ago. Where did this child come from? Thomas demanded. He felt a foundation of certainty. Crack inside him, he stormed back to the main house. The nursery maid, sensing disaster, quickly fled with the twins. "Tell me about the third child, the one who died," Thomas interrupted, his face flushed with rage. Margaret collapsed, the whole terrifying story spilling out. Her summer loneliness, her relationship with William, and the panic that led her to erase the child whose skin was too dark to risk. "I was frightened," she sobbed. "I thought if anyone saw him, they would know, and it would destroy everything." Thomas's response was ice. "So, you gave him away. You gave away my son." "My son, Margaret." In the twisted logic of plantation society, the child was Thomas's property, a part of his lineage, regardless of the circumstances of conception. Margaret's infidelity was a betrayal of control, not just marriage. He summoned Esther. "You took the child. You were supposed to dispose of it, but you took it to Danina." "Why?" Esther met his gaze steadily. "Miss Margaret asked me to hide him, so I hid him." Her defense was laced with subtle, calculated insolence. "I'm just a slave. Not sure I understand the fine points of what white folks mean when they tell me to make their problems disappear." Thomas felt a surge of violent rage, but underlying it was the terrifying awareness that Esther had the power to destroy his reputation. When Esther flatly suggested he sell the boy, Thomas realized he couldn't risk the questions about the child's parentage. Thomas established a tense, dangerous compromise. "This secret stays here. between the four of us. The child continues to live in the quarters as Danina's grandson. The existence of Samuel must become completely invisible, never to reach the ears of the outside world. If this information leaves this room, I will hold you personally responsible." When Thomas confessed his deep shame to Danina, she looked at him with ancient, knowing eyes. "I understand that you see shame, sir. But that child didn't choose his circumstances. He's just a boy," Thomas corrected her. "He's a problem." Danina nodded and left, carrying the conditions of Samuel's conditional life. Margaret retreated into shame and physical illness. Thomas retreated into absence and work, frequently riding to Richmond, unable to look at his legitimate sons without seeing the face of the third, forbidden child. And in the quarters, Samuel continued to grow, a 2-year-old boy whose mere existence was a constant, ticking testament to his mother's betrayal and his father's failure to control his own legacy. The dangerous compromise Thomas imposed was never sustainable. Plantation life was a web of visitors, business associates, and neighbors, and secrets spread like tobacco blight. The problem began when Margaret's older sister, Charlotte, visited in the fall of 1805. Competitive and suspicious, Charlotte was looking for anything to restore her sense of superiority over Margaret. During the morning walk, she spotted Samuel, now 3.5, playing near Danina's cabin. Charlotte froze, staring. The resemblance to Thomas and to the legitimate twins was undeniable. "Whose child is this?" she demanded. Danina maintained the cover story, but Charlotte's mind was already connecting the dots at 1802. The year Margaret gave birth. She stormed back to the house. "There's a child in the quarters who looks exactly like Thomas, born the same year as your twins." Margaret's denial cracked instantly. She lashed out, defending herself by citing the double standard. The white men, on every plantation, fathering mixed-dress children with impunity. "But you are a white woman," Charlotte hissed. "It's not the same." Charlotte was clear. Samuel's existence was a threat that could destroy the entire family's reputation and threaten the legitimacy of Margaret's acknowledged sons. The conclusion was inevitable. Margaret, exhausted by years of fear, ceded to her sister's demands. When Thomas returned, he found them waiting, a grim, united front. Charlotte demanded the child must go, arguing his continued presence was a constant humiliation. Thomas resisted, conflicted. "He's mine whether I want him or not, and I don't kill what's mine." Charlotte pressed him relentlessly to sell the boy, reasoning that practicality must override paternalism. Thomas was wrestling with two opposing impulses: legacy, property versus reputation, social standing. He stalled. "The child stays until I decide otherwise." Charlotte left 2 days later, defeated but not done. She made the critical mistake of sharing the secret with her husband, who, fueled by port at a gentleman's club, spread the tale. The rumor began its inevitable viral journey, leaking out in fragments and whispers. By the spring of 1806, the gossip had tainted the entire county. Thomas began noticing the change in social temperature. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Invitations ceased, and business associates grew cold. The secret was out, destroying his reputation with every retelling. In June 1806, Thomas's practicality finally won. He summoned Danina to his study. Samuel, now 4 years old, bright and curious, possessing Thomas's intelligence and Margaret's determination, would be taken to Richmond and sold to a family that needed a house servant. He could no longer remain at Fairmont. Danina received the sentence with the quiet stillness of someone who had survived too much to show open despair. She had raised him for 4 years. He was hers through the alchemy of daily care. As she looked at Samuel playing with his carved horse, unaware of the impending sale, Danina made a decision that was both desperate and calculated. That night, after Samuel fell asleep, Danina slipped out to Esther's quarters. "Master's selling Samuel," Danina whispered. "I can't let it happen. I won't lose another child." She was determined to run the ultimate transgression. Esther flatly warned her, "You'll die if they catch you." Danina countered that death was preferable to Samuel surviving in the brutal city houses. She would try and fail rather than surrender him. Over the next 2 days, Esther gathered fragments of a dangerous, fragile network, escape routes, safe houses, and places to avoid. They planned with the ruthless precision of generals. On the third night, Danina woke the confused, sleepy boy. "On an adventure," she said, slipping out just after midnight, toward the woods. They made it perhaps half a mile before Samuel stumbled, twisting his ankle. His painful cry and the critical delay cost them everything. By dawn, they had covered less than 3 miles. The alarm was raised when Thomas arrived to collect Samuel. His rage was immediate and volcanic. He called for the dogs and the hunting party, ordering the overseer to find the woman and use his judgment, but to bring the child back unharmed. Danina heard the hounds and knew it was over. She woke Samuel, holding his face in her weathered hands, delivering her final, defiante sermon. "Remember that I love you. Remember that you're worth more than they say you are. You're worth everything." The 6 men on horseback found them within the hour. Danina was overpowered, and Samuel was snatched away, screaming for his grandma. They tied Danina's hands and dragged her back. Thomas was waiting, examining Samuel to ensure he was unharmed. "Take her to the barn," Thomas ordered, indicating Danina. 20 lashes. Then put her in the storage cellar for 3 days. No food. Water only. The overseer hesitated, knowing the old woman might not survive, but Thomas was cold. "Make sure she does. I want her to live long enough to understand the consequences." Samuel screamed as Danina was dragged away. Esther, drawn by the commotion, appeared and accepted Thomas's offer to take the child, who clung to her desperately. Thomas knew Esther had helped Danina but was too tired of the complication to punish her fully. In the barn, Danina survived the 20 lashes, but she would never walk without pain again, and her shortened life became a living, agonizing cautionary tale about the price of resistance. The escape attempt had irrevocably changed everything. Thomas could no longer maintain the fiction. The child was too visible, too controversial, too much a source of instability. Thomas was utterly trapped. He could unsell Samuel to a family in Richmond without raising impossible questions about why a child resembling the Fairmont twins was being disposed of. Every option led to exposure and the destruction of his family's reputation. The solution, when it came, arrived in a letter from Charlotte, who had found a missionary family, the Hazes, traveling to the remote Ohio Valley. They sought orphans and unwanted children, asking no questions about parentage, offering a permanent removal framed as charity. Thomas seized the idea. 4-year-old child, sent 1,000 miles away, never to return. This was the perfect solution. Not quite murder, but a permanent erasure. He met with Reverend Hayes, smoothly lying that Samuel was the grandson of an old worker who could no longer care for him. The Hayeses, earnest and kind, agreed to take him, insisting they would keep his name. Thomas felt a stab of guilt at their kindness, but convinced himself Samuel would have a better life in Ohio, free from the stigma of his birth. The day of departure came quickly. Samuel was collected from Esther's cabin. Danina, broken by the whipping and the betrayal, was too weak to walk. Esther held the child tight, delivering her final, critical instruction. "You listen to these people, you learn everything they teach you, and you remember, you're worth just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone tell you different." Samuel was loaded onto the wagon with the other orphans. Margaret watched from her window, feeling a hollow grief for the child she had never allowed herself to claim, the physical evidence of her betrayal finally removed. The wagon pulled away, and Samuel looked back once before the trees swallowed the view. The years that followed were marked by slow decay. Danina learned Samuel was gone, and something inside her broke completely. She stopped speaking and died 2 years later. Esther continued her work, but secretly kept a hidden journal under her floorboards, documenting every true detail, believing someday someone would need to know the truth. The Fairmont family collapsed. Margaret died in 1827 from a wasting sickness of guilt and isolation. Thomas died in 1834, his once prosperous plantation, half its original size and heavily detridden. His sons sold the ravaged estate soon after. Esther's journal, the explosive key to the past, finally surfaced in 1889 and was later stored, largely forgotten, in the Virginia Historical Society. It wasn't until 1952 that a graduate student rediscovered the document, finally revealing the true story of Margaret Fairmont's triplets, the conspiracy, and the hidden son. Researchers attempted to trace Samuel. While records are incomplete, there is a tantalizing possibility. The 1850 Ohio census shows a Samuel Hayes, age 48, listed as a schoolteacher. The age and surname suggest he survived and found freedom and a productive life in the West. We'll never know for certain. That is the nature of histories that were meant to be erased. The question that haunts this story isn't just what happened to that third child, but how many others were disappeared for similar reasons, buried under empty graves to maintain appearances. The horror of Margaret Fairmont's story is not that it is unique, but that it was probably not unique. It is about human choice. A mother who protected two sons, but failed to claim the third. A father who claimed ownership of everything except the son who most needed his protection. And a society that demanded silence over justice. Samuel, the unwanted triplet, the boy who was too dark to acknowledge, whose life was treated as a problem to be solved, shows us that the darkest chapters of history are not about ghosts and curses, but about real people making terrible choices within a brutal system.